I then chatted with Lord Wolfson of Tredegar. He's a Conservative peer and also a commercial lawyer. He told me about his Jewish faith. Tell us about why you chose Tredegar as your title for the House of Lords.
Well, I mean, like many Jews in this country, I'm a relatively recent arrival in the sense that all of my great-grandparents were born abroad, in my case in Eastern Europe. All my grandparents were born here. And on my father's side, my great-grandfather ended up in Tredegar in South Wales. And there were lots of small Jewish communities in South Wales at the time. South Wales was quite a booming area economically. These immigrants found a place to work. But I think there was more to it than that. And I think religion played a part in this sense. Both the Methodists of South Wales and the Jews were non-conformists.
True.
It wasn't an established church. They both loved their Bible. They both prayed in very informal setups, in small congregations. And I think there was a natural affinity. So when it came to choosing a title, I wanted to remember a place that gave my family refuge. There was a famous blip in 1911. There was actually a riot in Tredegar, but we remember that because it was the exception. The Jews in South Wales had a long history. It was a welcoming place for them, and I wanted to recognise that when I chose my title.
And history is very important to the Jewish faith, and you've recognised that with your title. But tell us how you came to faith. Obviously, your family is from a Jewish background, but did you make a conscious decision as well to continue in that faith?
I suppose it's a mix, isn't it? I mean, for me, faith was a form of osmosis. I grew up in it.
Yes.
And the Jewish faith perhaps especially so, because in the Jewish faith, going to synagogue, for example, is part of it. But really, festivals are celebrated at home. The Sabbath is marked at home. The food you eat, if you're eating kosher food, that's made at home and served at home. So the religion is very much more home-based and community-based rather than just based in a synagogue or other religious building. So I grew up with it. And it really became part of me. Of course, when you get older, you can choose what you're going to keep, what you're not going to keep. Jonathan Sacks, the late chief rabbi, once said, when it comes to religion, by some miracle of cognitive geometry, great phrase, everybody thinks they're in the middle of the line. So people choose where to place themselves in the line between completely non-observant and very observant. But it's something I grew up with and I've always been very comfortable with.
And I find it interesting because Judaism, a bit like Catholicism, you have cultural Jews and you have religious Jews. And again, with Catholics, you have cultural Catholics. They grew up as Catholics, but don't really observe the faith anymore. Do you think that there's a battle between cultural Judaism and religious Judaism?
I wouldn't say it's a battle. I mean, Judaism, you're absolutely right, is a religion. It's a people. It's a culture. It's an ethnicity in English law. It's all of these things. And so you can have, as you say, religious Jews, you can have cultural Jews, you can have what I often call cardiac Jews, the people who feel Jewish in their heart, and they're cardiac Jews. And I mean, there's space for everybody. I often use the example of a family. The Jewish people is a family, and you may not agree with the way your second cousin lives their life, but because you're a family, because you're part of the same family, you need to maintain a connection. And I think that's the important thing, to maintain a connection. To be Jewish is to be part of an ongoing conversation, which has resounded through the generations.
And you're a lawyer by profession, and then you were appointed to the House of Lords back in 2020. How does your faith gel with both of those areas, your professional life and your life now as a politician in the House of Lords?
Well, in my professional life, I mean, I've never found any conflict between my faith and my professional work. Such conflict as there is really a diary conflict. So on Friday afternoons in winter, I would leave early. If I get stuck in court, I walk home because I don't take transport on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. I don't appear in court when it's a high holy day or something like that. But I've never found any antagonism or
And you've been able to manage that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think I recognise that it's different for me than it was for Jews 2 or 3 generations ago. And I also acknowledge that there are other minorities, whether religious or other minorities, who even today may not find it as easy as I found it. And I think one of the lessons, if you're from any sort of minority, is to look out for the problems that other minorities may still be having, which your own community perhaps has overcome. So in my professional life, I've never found it any sort of a problem. Neither in political life. I mean, I do change things where I feel I ought to. So, for example, when I was sworn in to the House of Lords, I took the oath, obviously, on a Hebrew Bible, which I brought in. In fact, I brought my grandfather's old Bible, which he had used in Tredegar when he was a little boy. So that really maintained a connection, which was nice. And when I spoke, for example, when Her late Majesty had passed away, I gave a speech which was very much a speech from a Jewish perspective.
Yes.
And for that, I wore a kippah. I don't normally wear a kippah in the House of Lords for work, but I felt because I was speaking as a Jew and my speech was inherently Jewish in content, I should acknowledge that, and also acknowledge that we live in a country where you can stand up in Parliament wearing a kippah. And I know that's something my mother, all Jews listen to their mothers, my mother was very focused on. She said, you know, you should show people that this is the sort of country over which Her late Majesty ruled. And Jewish history shows that's not always something you should take for granted.
No, absolutely. And I wanted to talk to you about religion and politics, obviously, because back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, you'll remember that a certain spin doctor said that we don't do God. And of course, the irony was his boss did do God, but he wasn't allowed to speak about it. I mean, I get the sense now that people are more comfortable to speak about their religion. Obviously, there's exceptions to that when I look at Tim Farron and the fact that he had to walk away from being the leader of the Liberal Democrats, and Kate Forbes in Scotland had a particularly tough time as well. But do you feel comfortable when you put on the traditional dress and speak as a Jew? You feel you can do that very openly?
Absolutely. I mean, I think perhaps the most important thing in politics is authenticity.
Yes.
I mean, you have to be who you are. And I would draw this distinction. When I come to politics, in fact, when I come to anything, I bring who I am. And being Jewish is part of who I am. It's not the totality of who I am, but it's an important part of who I am. What I think I would guard against is allowing religion to become politicized.
Yes.
And the way I would put it is perhaps this way. In the 20th century, what we saw was communism took the system, fascism took the nation, and made both into a religion. The danger for the 21st century is taking religion and allowing that to become politicized. We shouldn't allow politics to be overswept with religion and to make society or the nation a sort of a religious object of veneration like the communists and the fascists do. But equally, we should make sure that religion itself doesn't become politicized. That's different, however, from making sure that there is certainly a space for religious people in politics.
Yeah. And how do you feel then, David, if I may, about the established church in England? Because I'm from Northern Ireland. We don't have an established church, haven't had since 1867, I think it was, back in the time that Ireland was one jurisdiction. But here in England, we have an established church. Now, I am an Anglican, so it's of no difficulty for me. But I'm just wondering, when you're in the House of Lords and we're in a place where the bishops have a particular role, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, my immediate reaction is often to say, I don't want to get into conflicts of other religions.
Sure.
On the established church, I am actually a big fan. I have a theory, and I think it's proved by the history of Jews in this country, that when you have an established church, minority faiths often do better.
That's interesting.
Why? Because there is an acknowledgement of the importance of religion in society. Religious minorities often, not always, but often fare better in societies where religion is valued rather than in avowedly secular societies. And I would say even the United States is an example of that, because even though in the United States there is a legal separation of church and state, it's actually a very religious society in many, many ways.
But look, moving forward to the future, and we'll end on this, David, do you see a positive role for faith in politics in the future and in the public sphere as well, because of course you're in the legal profession? Do you see a role for people of faith within UK generally?
Absolutely. And I think also it's not a zero-sum game. I can practice my faith, you can practice yours. There is space for both of us. We don't need to compete in that sense. There's space for everybody. And I think that's a wonderful message, actually, for society to have. If I have one complaint about this country, it's that we're not proud enough of what we've achieved.
Absolutely.
We are a tremendously tolerant society. We found a place for different people from different backgrounds and different religions. Again, to quote Jonathan Sacks, his wonderful phrase was that this is a country, in the Hebrew, it's a Medina shel Chesed, a kingdom of kindness. And I think really that's what it is. And the history of my family in the UK is testament to that.
Lord David Wolfson of Tredegar, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.